Alright, this is an attempt at making a serious video, so in addition to our usual list of trigger warnings, I have to add one more. I am trying to have a proper conversation here. Don't get me wrong, it is eternally funny to shame this community's obsession with famous German literary nerd, dressing up as famous German literary bully, to groom famous German literary egg. But there's so much more to Limbus than that. At the end of the day, I, like I believe many others, play this game for the absolutely amazing Project Moon stories, characters, and general quality of writing. That allows me to be a complete elitist towards any other gacha games enjoyer. Well, that and Ishmael in a skin-tight diving suit. Now, I am by no means a Limbus lore master, nor am I a literature expert, but I do like to compare original stories and their in-game adaptations, figure out the themes, all that good stuff. And Canto VI is fascinating to me because of how close it is to the original story and how much of the original plot points we experience during the canto itself. As an example, Ishmael's story, in broad strokes, is very close to the original. She is tired of mundane work, gets on a whaling ship, things happen, they all perish hunting the white whale, except for Ishmael, but all that we see through flashbacks, and what we experience in Canto V itself is the stuff that happens after that. And in Sinclair's Canto, what we experience is pretty much a single chapter of the original work, and extremely exaggerated in adaptation at that. Trust me, real Cromer is not a major character in the Damien novel, and also slightly less sexy. In Canto VI, we experience quote-unquote original story from the point of Heathcliff's return to Wuthering Heights and to the very end, which is the most of the book. Major story beats are there, as well as a bunch of smaller details and references that tie Canto to the original. Catherine's journal writing and apparent insanity, prevalence of dogs in the story, Josephine's speech, Hindley's violin, this phrase, which I am sure Limbus writers saw and took just way too literally. Not to mention the final fight itself, which is a direct reference to Heathcliff in the book admitting that he felt Catherine's ghostly presence after her death, while never being able to see, hear or touch her. And it's represented by the fight where we experience a changing arena with two bosses that cannot interact with each other. But the point I want to make here is not about how similar the story is to the original. On the contrary, I am going to point out a huge difference between the stories, but for that I kinda want to first go ahead and spoil the entire Wuthering Heights novel for you. Mostly just Heathcliff's actions in it, but yeah, if you haven't read the original novel yet, but would like to, stop the video, read the book and please return to it later. If you are fine with spoilers, let's continue. After Heathcliff is brought to Wuthering Heights, he is cared for by Mr. Earnshaw but develops a mutual hate for Hindley. On the other hand, he is well liked by Catherine, and later, when Hindley becomes the owner of the manor, Heathcliff finds solace in games with Catherine which help him bear otherwise harsh treatment. After they try to sneak into the other mansion, Catherine is attacked by a dog and that results in her meeting Edgar Linton, who is immediately charmed by her and starts visiting. That results in Heathcliff hating him out of jealousy. And then he just happens to hear Catherine and Nellie talking, specifically about how Catherine plans to marry Edgar and how she cannot marry Heathcliff at all due to his low status. And that just breaks him. No solace left, so he disappears, goes away somewhere far from Wuthering Heights. Now, the book does not state what he was doing during his absence. Due to his rough nature, people assume that he might have turned to banditry, and Limbus' story goes with that, clearly stating that at some point Heathcliff joins an Irish-American criminal gang, but it's not really important for the story. What's important is he returns with money and starts lodging at Wuthering Heights. There he forms a weird hate and money-based relationship with Hindley, who gambles and borrows heavily from Heathcliff while still wanting to shoot the guy. Eventually Hindley's health deteriorates and he dies, and the manor goes to Heathcliff due to all the money Hindley owed him. While all that happens, Heathcliff tries to reconnect with Catherine. That kinda drives her a bit crazy, and Heathcliff makes it worse by stealing Isabella, Edgar's sister. Initially, Isabella finds Heathcliff attractive and elopes with him, but he treats her absolutely horribly, so eventually she runs away and stays away from both manors. She gives birth to Heathcliff's son, Linton Heathcliff, and can we talk real quick about the names in the novel? Because what the hell is this? I mean, it's fine in Limbus where we only have to deal with one generation of these bastards, but what's with the children's names? Catherine's child is also named Catherine, or Cathy, so yeah, that's absolutely not confusing. Heathcliff is a stray, so he only has a first name, but his son inherits Isabella's last name as first name, and Heathcliff's first name as last name. And eventually we get Cathy Linton marrying Linton Heathcliff. Like, what the hell? Who made this? Emily? Emily? Are you even okay, love? Anyways, I am getting a bit ahead. Because yes, Catherine's health deteriorates and she dies after giving birth to Cathy. Cathy becomes Edgar's heir, which Heathcliff uses in the next stage of his revenge plan. At some point Isabella's health deteriorates, she dies, and Heathcliff takes ownership of his son. He keeps him frightened and obedient and basically has complete control over him. Heathcliff's son and Catherine's daughter exchange letters, and that eventually is used by Heathcliff to lure Cathy out of her manor and basically kidnap her. He makes her marry his son, while Edgar is trying to change his will. However, Heathcliff has bribed the only lawyer around who stole the process. And since Edgar's health has been deteriorating, he dies before being able to change anything. Also, yes, in case you were wondering, people just die a lot in that one. I guess it was just that common among the landowners back in the day. Too much time spent inside, not enough time spent outside touching grass. Nellie, village-born and raised maid, outlives almost everyone in the story. Back to the legal drama. After Edgar's death, his manor goes to Cathy, through her to Linton, and through him to Heathcliff, who becomes the owner and master of both manors. You can say he literally uses Isabella's and Edgar's flesh and blood to exact his vengeance and take all that they owned. After that, Heathcliff just forgets about his son, as he is no longer needed. Linton's health deteriorates and he dies, and Heathcliff prepares to destroy both manors as his final act of revenge. However, Cathy, who is now forced to live in Wuthering Heights, gets close to Hareton. Hareton is Hindley's son, and after Hindley's death, Heathcliff became his guardian, intentionally keeping the boy low and uneducated. He pretty much continued to exact his vengeance on Hindley through Hindley's son, which is absolutely messed up but admirable dedication to vengeance. So, Cathy and Hareton get closer and manage to find some joy in each other's company, in the same way how Heathcliff himself did with Catherine, when they were young and were treated harshly by Hindley, and seeing that makes Heathcliff relent. You see, after Catherine's death, Heathcliff tried to dig out her grave, but suddenly felt her ghostly presence, and he has been feeling it all the time since, not able to see or hear her, but constantly tortured by her ghost, always barely out of reach. But in seeing Cathy and Hareton together, he in a way recognizes and remembers the true spirit of Catherine of old, and his own for that matter. And that just makes him stop in his tracks. He loses his desire for revenge, but at that point revenge is his whole life, so he loses the will to live. So his health promptly deteriorates and he dies. You all saw it coming. That was a lot. Even though I did try to keep it somewhat brief. But why did we just go through that, other than to know that people really just die a lot on their own in the original story? Well, I have used images from the Canto VI, and that makes the main difference between the stories quite obvious. At some point, we switch Heathcliffs. Because in Canto VI we have two of them, and so the question is, why? Within the lore of the game, having two Heathcliffs is apparently perfectly reasonable and possible thing to happen due to mirror technology. This is a now known technology in the city. We already had a whole canto specifically about that invention, a variant of that technology was present in Leviathan, and it is literally the technical justification behind the gacha in the game. Characters and events that make this possible in the Canto VI are outside of the original story, but they do make sense in Limbus' narrative, and that is the important thing here. Things must make sense for the world, which is extremely important for any story, more so than staying true to the adapted book, especially in such a distinct setting as the city. But does having two Heathcliffs make sense for the story itself? After all, Canto VI is a story of Heathcliff, and when we say Heathcliff, we are thinking about our Heathcliff, that lovable thug. But what happens is, at some point some other not our Heathcliff jumps in and basically assumes the original Heathcliff role. And I do mean that quite literally. The guy blocks our Heathcliff's path at a crucial moment and pretty much steals his agency. How can that in any way be a good thing for the story and character development? Well, let's assume that we only get one Heathcliff in Canto VI. In that case, to even loosely follow the original story, our Heathcliff would have to steal Catherine's coffin and then kill Hindley and Linton. Oh, and Isabella too, never forget Isabella. I feel she didn't get a lot of spotlight, so it is my duty to remind you that yes, she existed. Or maybe our Heathcliff would have to kill and or torture them, all while trying to get to the coffin. I wouldn't even try to imagine how that story would look and whether it would be any good, but I can tell you for sure, if we only get one, then our Heathcliff would have had to take on the role of a villain. Because, let's be real here, Heathcliff in the novel is absolutely a villain. You are reading the book and throughout the whole thing you're just wondering why no one has called the police, child services and animal legal defense fund on this guy. I already went through the list of things he does, but the devil is in the details and you have to read the book to know how cruel the guy really is. Trespassing, kidnapping, bribing of legal authorities to claim property, that is all just a list. But the way he treats others, both adults and children, is just beyond ruthless. Oh, and animals. I didn't mention that, but it happened when Isabella eloped with Heathcliff. First thing he did, just to show how much he hates her and her whole family. Heathcliff immediately hanged her little dog in front of her, on a nearest tree outside of the house. The guy is just cruel, and our Heathcliff would have had to become as cruel for the story to work. Personally, I do not have a particular problem with some of the sinners acting as villains. We can't expect all of them to be nice. And I really hope to see Ryoshu go completely apeshit and mass murdery, artsy in her story. That would be absolutely glorious. Can our Heathcliff be a Canto VI villain though? Well, yes, but actually maybe no? And it feels like there are two arguments against that. First argument is that it would clash with how we view the character. I think Heathcliff was pretty well liked even before his Canto. Yes, he is violent and rash, but he is relatable, and he was a supporting force in Ishmael's Canto. From trying to shake her out of her stupor, yes, very violently, but that's just how he is, violence is his friendship language, and to getting her out of the palate corruption with clear resemblance to prior Ishmael saving event with Queequeg. He even got Queequeg ID to cement that feeling. So, taking him after Canto V and flipping into a ruthless villain would have been quite jarring for the players. Another argument that can be made is that our Heathcliff just isn't the type of character to do this. Yes, he is technically a violent and dangerous maniac who is always ready to bash Sinclair's head in with a baseball bat. Also, he was part of a syndicate, which implies a lot of violence, but it mostly feels like random and immediate aggression. Wuthering Heights Heathcliff harbors years-old hatred towards people, and he is patient but unrelenting in his revenge. And that is really not the impression we get from our Heathcliff. These arguments might be the reason for the inclusion of another Heathcliff, except no they aren't. There are easy counters to both. First of all, our feelings as players do matter, but it's Project Moon we're talking about. They are people randomly dropping Ricardo on our heads. You think they worry about our feelings? I can absolutely see them subverting our expectations and making Heathcliff a full-on evil guy for the story. The more we like Heathcliff at that moment, the bigger the impact of such a flip would have been. And the guy does hate these people from his past with a burning passion. And the combination of that old hate and all love for Catherine, along with the fact of her death, would absolutely drive him to go crazy with vengeance. Maybe not as meticulous as in the original, but no less ruthless. In fact, it almost does. We can see that right before the other Heathcliff steals the show. Our Heathcliff was ready to go through anyone, friend or foe, to get to Catherine's coffin. So, if not for that other guy, he quite possibly would have become the horrifying villain on the spot, whether you'd like that or not. Okay, I'm sure by now you all are tired of my musing, so let's finally get to the point. Why are there two of them? Well, believe it or not, with all the horrendous things the guy does, he is the anti-hero of the story, not the villain. Or, well, he is both the hero and the villain. But while you're reading the book, you feel sorry for him at the very start of the story. But then, when he returns and starts doing all the horrible and frankly unhinged shit, you really kind of forget to pity him, and instead you just watch him in horrified amazement. Heathcliff experiences a change of heart towards the end, seeing Cathy and Hareton together, but still, it's not quite enough to alleviate the impression the reader would have of him by that point. Enter Project Moon writers, who took that story, added available in-setting tools, and solved that problem for us. I mentioned the moment when Heathcliff is ready to burst into rage and how the other Heathcliff swoops in and steals his agency. Well, what if instead we look at it as our Heathcliff just splitting into two? The side of him that can see nothing but vengeance and is more active is the one who tortures both manors and destroys Hindley, Linton and Isabella. That is the side desperately trying to unearth Catherine's coffin and grasp at her dead body. That is the villain. Meanwhile, another side of him experiences constant despair over his own real and perceived inadequacies. That side is constantly tortured by all the mistakes and missed opportunities of the past. That side remembers Catherine's spirit. It is subdued by the villain's actions, but it's still there. That is the tragic hero, actually always present but finally winning only at the very end. Our Heathcliff and Earl King Heathcliff are one and the same, and they are both real Heathcliff. That both means that Canto VI is still very much all about him, and that he is quite capable of extreme brutality and violence if he is ever driven to that. But in separating the original one into two, we are allowed to experience both hate and pity towards the same character at the very same time. And in the end, that character willingly dies after finally seeing hope through the veil of hate and vengeance. And what's left is his memory keeping Catherine alive. And I will be honest with you, I did not really understand Heathcliff's duality while reading the book. I already knew Canto VI's story at that point, but I, like probably many others, was so amazed by original Heathcliff's ruthlessness, I could not see his tragic side at all. But then, I took another look at Canto VI, asked myself, what does it all mean with the story we got, and then I saw it. It all clicked, and that was a goddamn amazing realization. Project Moon made it easier to see while still not just explaining the answer outright. And that is why I consider Wuthering Heights adaptation in Canto VI to be absolute peak. That adaptation elevates the original and helps you realize its themes and intentions, which is not even something that adaptation absolutely has to do, but it does. But it is just as I said at the very beginning of this video. These are the very things we play Project Moon games for. Anyways, that's my take on that story. I hope that you found that somewhat interesting, and do share in the comments whether you agree, disagree, or maybe have a completely different take on the whole Canto.